evermore as human capital, as an entrepreneur of the self, as a product of his or her self-construction, the line between the subject and its dark double, its doppelganger, becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. Hence the global rise of what Hugo Schwartz has called the culture of the copy, one dimension of which is the increasing everyday practice of faking, counterfeiting, and plagiarizing the personhood of others. Hence also the emergence of the so-called imposter syndrome, a psychiatric condition whose growing number of sufferers actually see themselves as frauds. Now, patently, this speaks of a particular Cartesian genealogy of selfhood. In South Africa, of which I shall be speaking, there are many people who draw on different cultures of personhood, cultures that interact with this European genealogy in unexpected ways. It goes without saying that the dialectics of self-fashioning today, here as elsewhere, are anchored in the architecture of society, economy, and the state. The real sociology of that architecture is highly complex, of course. All the more so as the geopolitics that underpins it have undergone profound shifts with the proliferation of the planetary economy, with the globalization of the division of labor, with the spiraling traffic of people, objects, and images across once sovereign borders. Nations have been beset from within by mounting assertions of difference, by compromised belonging, by a confusion of private and civic identities. In short, by a rising obsession with the problem of social identity itself. All of this in growing counterpart with growing concerns about the authenticity of personhood sui generis. In these circumstances, bodies, both personal and public, seem threatened by alien and alienating intrusion that eludes existing defenses, by the perfectly ordinary person who turns out to be someone, something dangerously different from what they say they are, by the spectre of the counterfeit citizen, the imposter immigrant, the bogus asylum seeker, the respectable rogue, the inscrutable terrorist. Contemporary states struggle constantly to deal with the problem of identity and authenticity, and to do so primarily by recourse to the conventional means and ends of the law. But is the law equal to this task in the 21st century? Can it address the paradoxes of personhood born of the historical conditions that have nurtured late modernity and its identity? In December 2009, one of South Africa's legendary Zulu musicians passed away quite suddenly. That is he. Victim, it is commonly said, of medicine given him by a traditional healer at the behest of a famous rival artist. The musician's name was Khulekani Kwake Khumalo, that is his picture, or Khulekani Kwako Mseleku, depending on how we translate the niceties of Zulu clanship. The Khumalos were his father's kin. The Mselekus, among whom he grew up, were his mother's people. To black South Africans, he was known primarily by his moniker, Nkuleni. Khulekani was a famed Maskandi, a singer of Maskanda, a hip, highly popular folk genre, a style heavily autobiographical, self-creating, and often associated with the migratory road between the country and the city. A genre in which the singer tells stories of life and times in the post-colony, of the living and the dead, of things mundane and mysterious. The greatest mystery surrounding the man, however, lay not in his music, but in a curious turn of events, one which his haunting songs could never have anticipated. Having been buried in 2010, his funeral attended by politicians and public figures and local celebrities, Khulekani ought to have joined the realm of his ancestors. However, in January 2012, 2 years later, he returned to the homestead of his family in Nkutu, in KwaZulu-Natal. This to the great surprise of his close kin, including his 4 wives. The resurrection of Khulekane caused a public furore. Social media in South Africa were abuzz with speculation as 30,000 people gathered in the small town of Encontro to welcome their idol back from the pre-ancestral world. So hysterical, and here I'm quoting from the popular media, so hysterical were some of these Maskanda fans that police officers in riot trucks were dispatched to handle the frenzy occasioned by his official unveiling. A frenzy fanned by the sheer fascination of seeing a recently dead hero recreate himself and walk again among the living. The press and TV were out in numbers too, there to bear witness to the mass effervescence and to hear Khulekane sing. Indeed, the urge to capture and commodify his master's voice would soon launch a lively dispute over its authenticity and its ownership. The greetings of the returned Maskandi, delivered from the turret of a public order vehicle, were terse and to the point. I've always been alive, he declared. I've been held captive by zombies for 2 years, a victim of witchcraft. Now, talk of zombies, as we shall see later, evokes a fan of references here, cultural and pragmatic, having to do in large part with the loss of wage labour in the society. He went on. Those who captured me kept me in a cave. They shaved my dreadlocks, one of his celebrated trademarks, because they wanted to make me into a tokolosh. A tokolosh, as all South Africans here will know, is a frightening diminutive figure who is a witch's assistant. He went on, I was forced to sing and eat mud to stay alive. I've lost weight, but it is me. His harrowing experience, he explained, ended when he escaped, waking up in a field near Johannesburg, the epicenter of migrant labour and South African cultural production. From here, a few days later, he returned home. Uncharacteristically for Khulekane, he refused to sing, choosing instead to recite his Zulu clan names and praises, the symbolic substantiation of his true identity, his socially authenticated self. He promised to sing later when he felt stronger. Many fans were very skeptical of the resurrection. The absence of Khulekane's dreadlocks worried them, as did the scarification marks on his face that looked different, more livid. Some said that Khulekane now had a gold tooth, which he had not had before. In parts of colonial Central and Southern Africa, gold teeth have resonances that go back to prophetic anti-colonial figures. If the fans gathered at Encontro were divided about the authenticity of the resurrected musician, his family were even more strikingly so. His maternal grandmother, Zintombi Mseleku, greeted his return by declaring emphatically, "It really is him." She should know, she added acidly, having raised him. Bride wealth, her family told us, remained unpaid in respect of the parents' marriage. As all anthropologists will know, this means the marriage didn't really take place, so he still belonged to his mother's people. He's looking a little worn, and his cheeks are a little less chubby, but it is him. By contrast, his paternal grandfather, Tlanimanzi Comaroff, was suspicious at first, but he soon decided that the boy had indeed come back. As the days passed, Khulekane's two sets of kin began to take opposite sides, and to assert them with increasing vehemence. His Matakin, despite grandmother Zintombi's initial statement, now argued that the returnee was not Khulekane. A maternal cousin, to whom we recently spoke, put it thus: "This man is not Nkuleni. There is nothing about him that indicates that he's him. Nkuleni and I were very close from childhood. It is not him, and that is where the Msuleku family stand." Noting that the Kumaros would not know anyway, since Khulekane had been raised by his mother's people. To which the Kumaros responded that they had no idea what the singer looked like when he died, since his mother's people had not allowed them to see the body at burial. A not so veiled accusation of bad faith, even perhaps of witchcraft, or even worse, an effort to conceal the fact that he was not actually dead. For their part, the Masulekos quickly developed a narrative of what the imposture was all about: money. Another cousin, Lesilani Masuleko, explained that it was a well-orchestrated plan to steal the dead singer's wealth. He had owned 2 taxis, whose capital value in South Africa was substantial, and was owed an unspecified sum in unpaid royalties by the recording companies, who linger in the back of his story as kind of dark figures. He had released 5 solo albums, the latest of which had sold more than 78,000 copies, which was a lot of copies in this case. Not surprisingly, his resurrection, however, resulted in a run on his CDs, which was selling in ever larger numbers. As we discovered later, there are no hidden assets. The taxis had been repossessed and no royalties seemed to be forthcoming. Nonetheless, allegations of patrilineal greed and hidden wealth continued to circulate. But what of those who knew Kulekani, or at least his body best of all, his wives? Here the verdict was split 2-2. One, Zeklele Zulu, who had a 10-year-old son by Kulekane, the dead musician, was emphatically negative. Her heart was broken, she said, as she told of a scar that the singer had not had before. The first reaction of another partner, Nomfala Majola, with whom Kulekane had lived for a time in Johannesburg, was that the returnee was a bad spirit. But once she had, as she put it, checked his feet, his neck, and his smile, she was persuaded that he was not an impostor, and loudly denounced all evidence to the contrary. "I know this is the father of my child," she said. Her dogged insistence is reminiscent of a similar case of imposture in the US, now the subject of a recently acclaimed documentary film, which some of you may have seen, called The Imposter. It tells how a 23-year-old dark-haired French Algerian, Frédéric Baudin, an inveterate trickster, passed himself off as a 16-year-old blonde blue-eyed American, the unfortunate Nicholas Barkley, who had disappeared mysteriously from his Texas home in 1994. Despite the obvious differences between the two, Barkley's family, including his mother, firmly maintained that Baudin was their son when he turned up 3 years later, and continued to do so until a chance series